Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact the show at twitter.com/DW Groovecast and through Facebook at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a funky. Ain't a funky.
Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Well,
We get straightened out?
No, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Next.
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
You know, man, it doesn't happen very often, but there's times that current events and news that come up on our timelines and social media makes us look like freaking geniuses.
Talking about the wedding drummer who finally snapped and
No.
beat the mother of the bride within inches of her life.
No, I am talking about a throwback, or we'll call it a callback, to a previous episode when we were discussing travel etiquette.
Mm-hmm.
And if you recall, one of the things that we discussed in detail when we were talking about airport travel was you have to be very careful these days when you're taking gear, and especially very delicate and expensive gear, through the TSA using just like either a soft carry-on or some type of non-flight approved style case, and then all of a sudden you rock and roll right up to the gate thinking, oh boy, I'm home free, and then they won't let you take this piece of precious cargo on board. And worst case scenario happens. Let's hypothetically say you get into a physical altercation with someone from the airline. Yes, that happened this week, and I think probably the important part of the story is, no, it was not some long-haired, crazy Neanderthal rocker. It was actually a classical violinist that got into a physical altercation because they wouldn't let her bring a violin on board.
I would have thought it was that it was time for a break. And she's not having it with her union.
I was going to say,
rules and all.
I was going to say, break time for the flight staff or break time for the orchestra.
But she's programmed that every 2.5 hours she gets her 30 minutes. And
Oh, it ain't 2.5 hours.
no, it's
no,
not.
sir. No,
All
sir.
right, enough. I'm not going to pick on those that practiced.
But it does drive home our point that if you are planning on taking something on board, I still say you need to make sure that it's in some kind of a flight approved case. Because if it was in one of the if you know what I'm talking about, John, it's kind of a soft canvas outside looking violin case.
Yeah.
You would not want that thing thrown around, man, under the belly of a jet.
Not if you have a $100,000 instrument. in it,
Exactly. I firmly believe that if you've got said $100,000 instrument, spend, we'll say $350, $450 on a violin flight case if you're going to be traveling like that.
Right. And, you know, most of the time, I don't know, I've come to the point where I just do a hard case with cymbals and check them.
Same here.
Because, you know, even just the overhead bins are a hit or miss as far as depth.
Oh, yeah.
And on top of that, I'm someone who I try to avoid confrontation with authority because I kind of have this resentment to it, and I don't need to invite said wrestling match if I could just check my cymbals in a hard case.
John, I would think that a few years in the military might do you good, man. Kind of get you straightened out.
I would think you stop thinking would do me good.
Steve Gadd was in the military. Look what it did for him. But, you know, that whole thing about, even taking your cymbals. Look, again, not to make us, you know, we don't want to be preaching to you guys, but I mean, again, our point was perfectly made by this real life scenario that happened this past week. But take it from us. Here's a couple of guys that might have $1,000, $1,200 worth of cymbals. Certainly not a $100,000 violin, but yet we do have the traditional flight case. And again, to describe it for you guys, we're talking about a hard shell wooden case that has like Tolex on the outside. It's got metal ball corners, recessed handles, recessed latches. Those are the kind of things that you could literally drop out of the bottom of a plane, and most of the time your cymbals or whatever you've got inside of it's going to be okay. So that's what we're talking about. And certainly if you've got a $100,000 violin or even more, you need a proper flight case. So anyway, that's that.
A worthwhile investment for a lot of reasons. I mean, if you're going to jump on a gig and everything's thrown in a trailer, it might not be the cush little place where you can put your soft case, cymbal case, all that. I'm just always be prepared to have something for less than desirable transportation.
Yeah.
Or storage in said transportation.
You could even go as far as saying any time when you are not personally in charge of handling and or storing or transporting your instrument, that flight case might be the ticket.
I agree. Yeah. Hard cases for the drums, even when it's at that case, I do. If I'm handling it, fine, but other than that, protect.
So we're off our genius soapbox now.
Well, you have to remember too, like in this case, she clearly got past TSA.
Yep.
Take stuff away.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing we need to be careful of, is sometimes there's just a power-hungry person who had a bad day in traffic getting to work, and the only thing they can do is deny you your instrument going on the plane. Even though that little piece of paper says otherwise, sometimes there's just going to be a person that's like, nah, I'm not giving in.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened.
Yep. You got to be prepared, because you're probably going to lose most of the time.
Yeah, and John, I think what the actual rub or the reason for why this was disallowed was not because of safety. I don't think it had anything to do. I think it was a space requirement.
Right.
Was what it was.
That sounds like that's how I've had with friends with guitars and such.
So I think that was the issue on that. And like I said, that's virtually an inarguable point.
Yep, I agree.
So, what's not an inarguable point?
It's fun to play for 800 kids.
Wrong. I could
sorry.
argue that. I don't want to play devil's advocate here. Here's an inarguable point.
Okay.
You can win free gear.
You could.
All you have to do, John, is navigate your little browser over to iTunes to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast podcast page. Leave us a review, a written review, and let me go ahead and say this. Someone left us a review this morning by just clicking the stars.
Bummer.
It's a bummer, man, because here's the thing. If you don't...
no, it's not a bummer for us. We appreciate it.
That's true.
But they
yes,
could be winning.
They could be winning if they would just leave us a quick written review, because here's the thing. For us to draw your name and make you a lucky winner, you have to provide us your name on a written review. And so you're probably going, okay, well, tough guys, I'm going to give you a written review. What do I stand to win here? And in the immortal words of Anton Chigurh, everything.
Okay.
You can win everything.
I'm sure that the fabulous company that is providing said prize is really ecstatic about that.
Do you know what I tell anybody when it comes to any type of advertising or any type of promotional or sponsorship? The more outrageous and ridiculous you can make it, the more it's going to stick in people's minds.
That's true.
If you sit there and if you do some kind of I'm reading off of a script sort of thing, that's just, people fast forward through that stuff. But if you make a fool out of it, man, people will listen to it.
If you send us $100, we will allow you access to our iTunes page to leave us a glowing review.
Make the check available to, or make it endorsable to Drummers Weekly Groovecast. But
you'll be getting your money back.
That's true.
We aren't going to be able to cash it.
So anyway, what you stand to win is from our good friend Jacob and folks down at the Monk Drum Company. You win first prize, a 10-inch original Monk drum. Second prize, yes, we're drawing for 2, is a set of Monk bongos. Do yourself a favor. If you're not familiar with these fantastic musical instruments, point your browser after you go to iTunes and register over to monkdrums.com and take a look at what we're talking about. An original Monk drum uses the concept of a standing cajon / conga. In other words, it's not the traditional style cajon where you sit down and sit on top of the cajon and play, and it's not a traditional conga from the standpoint to where you have a skin or synthetic head on it. It's actually the concept of a wooden cajon, but it is tall enough to sit on like a drum throne and play like a conga.
Right.
So it's the best of both worlds. It's a wonderful concept. So that's the 10-inch original Monk drum. That's our first prize. And then second prize, it's a set of Monk bongos, which, again, take the concept of a cajon, but make it small enough, have 2 playing surfaces, one for a high sound, one for a low sound, and make it to the point to where you can actually place it between your knees and play it like a traditional bongo, and there you have Monk bongos. It's good stuff, man. I want some of both. Hint, hint, Jacob, down at Monk Drums. But anyway, that's our new contest, our new giveaway. So get over to iTunes, go to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast page, leave us a written review, and John and I will get on Facebook Live to where you can see our shiny, happy faces during the week of our 52nd show. That would be our 1-year anniversary. Again, more details to come as we get a little bit closer. We'll give you the exact date that we're going to do the drawing when we get closer to the date. But get over there. Sign up. If you've already left a review on iTunes, you are registered. John, did I leave out anything?
Man, I am excited to see the review, quote unquote, from whoever wins these, and hear what they have to say. And so that's cool. Other than that, I kind of do have something to say.
Do it.
You know how bipolar we are with our post-gig mindset?
Yeah.
I was just thinking about this the other day, and it's just amazing to me how you can be flying high after one and ready to sell everything after another. Think we should talk about that a little bit?
I know we should talk about that because you and I have even had discussions along that same line about how crazy is it to where when you're doing a gig, most of our gigs mutually that we do, when we're doing rock and pop stuff, we play certain amounts of songs to sequences and or clicks. And virtually all of our studio gigs are going to be played to clicks and or some kind of a programmed sound. How crazy is it that you can play the same song one night and just be destroying the click, just right on top of it, feels like $1 million. The next night you can play the same thing and it's just like, my God, I am fighting this thing. I'm behind, I'm ahead, I'm right on, I'm all over it.
Or maybe the bass player is.
Yeah. I mean, what do you do?
Man, I am a firm believer in the fact that many of us, and now I'm not talking about you perfect machines who can play everything dead on and perfect every day and brag about it. You know who you are. But I really believe the majority of us overlook the metaphysical day-to-day insanity our body goes through. And I think that is a big part of how that happens.
I know it's a big part for me, man, because I'll tell you one thing that gets me whenever I'm having, we'll call it a bad night or a bad day behind the drums, the old inner dialogue, the old inner mind gets going. It starts telling you, starts saying all kind of inane things. Watch your kick drum. Don't rush your kick drum. Don't. And then invariably what ends up happening when your mind gets in the way? You end up rushing your kick drum.
Oh, of course.
You know, I mean, it's bizarre. It's one of those.
So your brain goes to specifics?
It does, yeah.
Mine just blankets me with thoughts of worthlessness.
Yeah.
It does. It's too lazy to actually pinpoint what's wrong. It just says.
Well, see, but I think both of our minds are basically doing the same thing, which is essentially this.
You're just analytical.
Well, it overthinks.
Oh, no doubt.
I mean, perfect example. How many times have you played? You've already played it this morning. I'm going to play it tonight. Just the simple 1 and 3 on the kick, 2 and 4 on the snare drum. We've been doing it since we were teenagers, right? Since kids been played it hundreds of thousands of times. To be conservative, we'll call it that. And then all of a sudden, the mind gets in the way, and it gets in the way, and it basically impedes your basic instincts to play it, which you've played it hundreds of thousands of times. You can do it in your sleep, but sometimes that mind gets overactive. It happens to me, John, primarily 2 different ways: when I'm dead tired or if I'm over caffeinated.
Makes sense.
The old racing mind thing. And then it gets in the way, and then all of a sudden it tells you, whatever you do, don't rush your bass drum.
It happens to me when I'm in an environment that is a little foreign, like, I'm subbing on something, or playing a kid I'm not comfortable with that. And it usually is a fill or a 2-bar little latency going into a chorus, and you're beating yourself up because you're not burying it. And then it just goes. Like, I'm kind of like on my regular gigs, I'm sort of like, whatever. I'll even turn a click off, I don't care.
Rebel.
But sometimes in other environments or the studio, like, you can just get wacky quick.
Well, John, I thought what we would do then today is talk about some of these issues and then give some solutions. Give some possible, we'll call them mental drumming techniques. Zen in the art of drumming. Let's just start ripping off book titles. Effortless drumming. Free drumming.
Mommy, please help.
Well,
drumming.
we don't want to get sued here on this. But no, what we thought we would do today is talk about some things that we both mutually do, things that do help from time to time. You're never going to 100% cure all this stuff, but you can certainly put a damper on it and certainly fight off the worst parts of it. So I thought what we would do is we'd just start talking about some of these mental techniques. And let me say this before we start getting emails about yoga and exercise. That's perfectly fine, but we're talking about mental techniques today. We're not talking about physical techniques, because I completely understand and agree that there are times that exercise can absolutely help from that standpoint.
To focus even.
Yes, absolutely help you to focus. So,
but we know most of us aren't going to be that into exercise.
Some.
At least me and my 14 personalities.
So I thought what we would do is we would address some like really common human emotions and mental roadblocks that everybody has. These are just human things, human tendencies, human emotions. 1, fear.
Can have it in droves under a million different circumstances.
Yeah, and I think we should probably kind of define what fear is from the standpoint of when we compare it to these other emotions, because there's a couple of other that people will go, well, that's the same thing in it. Not exactly. Okay. Fear is your involuntary emotion to an immediate threat or an immediate obstacle. In other words, this is not something that you've pre-thought out. We're going to get to that in a minute. Fear would be being on a gig. Let's say we'll use it as a gig fear. How's that? Being on a gig, and then all of a sudden you didn't realize it, but Sting is in the audience and he comes up to play. You couldn't imagine that was going to happen, but all of a sudden you're thrust into it. What are you going to do?
Play.
You're on a jazz jam session. You're up there playing, and then all of a sudden, George Coleman. This actually happened to me back in the early 90s. George Coleman's in the freaking audience. He comes up. He calls Cherokee. This is his famous story. He does it all, or he did it all the time. He's old. He calls Cherokee ridiculous breakneck tempo, upwards of 400, and then not that the tempo is what matters more to me, but the other poor saps in the rhythm section have to play it chromatically in all 12 keys. Every chorus going up a half step. That's fear, brother, right
or
there.
Or every soloist in line.
Well,
that's 12 deep.
Let me tell you this, man. This will certainly, if you're not convinced at the true badass that George Coleman, the saxophone player, is, after he played 12 choruses, when the There was a guitarist that was up there and a trumpet player. When they started playing, he actually sat down behind the piano and started comping behind them on piano. So he and then he played a solo on piano afterwards. So there you go. There's
Whatever,
that.
George.
Now the next one. Worry. Oh boy, this is the one that gets me. Now, contrasting worry to fear, worry is actually a voluntary thing.
Preconceived.
Yes, it is. And it is basically worrying about future bad things. You could almost call that the byproduct of worry is anxiety.
Agreed.
That's the one that gets me, man. I mean, it gets me from everything like, oh my God, traffic is bad. I'm going to be ridiculously late, to, oh my gosh, I got to load in and get, this is a unfamiliar load in. All that kind of stuff, even to the point to when you're doing maybe unfamiliar gigs, blowing this unfamiliar gig up to where it could be this incredibly daunting task ahead of time when actually you get there and it works out fine.
Right. They call every song you know.
Yes.
That's very, sometimes too, reputations of people can bring about some of that.
Yep.
And I battle with that sometimes. Like my preconceived notion of, someone had a bad experience with someone. Mm-hmm. And I'm projecting that on this gig where that person their mom might have died that day, or the other person who told you about it isn't maybe the most diplomatic and respectful person in their own right. So there's some of that too. Like I've been guilty of kind of worrying about someone's reputation or their opinion, and end up being a real pleasant expect
Absolutely.
A lot of times.
Well, and then also along that same lines, when you start thinking about worrying about someone that you're playing with that might have an incredibly sterling reputation as like a fantastic player, and then it's kind of one of those things: am I going to measure up? Am I going to play to his standard, to his liking? So it's kind of along the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think about who he's played with, other
Exactly.
drummers, and you're just like,
Well, and that kind of leads into the next, we'll call it, maybe not emotion, but maybe like a mental roadblock would be self-doubt. Self-doubt, or the imposter syndrome, which we've talked a little bit about as well.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that one.
Feeling like you're going to get found out, feeling like you're a fraud. That's a bad one too, man.
Well, there's always, let's take it to the ridiculous extreme that we are capable of. And I'll use myself as an example. I am waiting to be found out in a world-class studio with world-class musicians playing a burning samba that we're sight reading. That
happen a lot?
Like every day to most studio players, right? Every day. I mean, it has to, because that's the worst case scenario, and it's going to happen to me, right? I'm going to be found out, and I'll never work again. That's kind of insanity that we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
That's never going to happen to me because, A, I can't think of a situation where I've ever gone in a studio not knowing what I was going to play. And B, some people do. I know. There's always that, blah, blah guy. No, seriously. It's not going to happen most of the time. And more importantly, when I find out it's a burning samba, there are going to be 3 or 4 phone numbers given to the contractor, and I'm going to stay home and watch a baseball game.
You made the perfect point, though, John, that if you were on a session, or in particular on a gig where there were these, we'll call them out of the ordinary demands that are placed on you, if said contractor or said producer has any value of self-preservation, they themselves would let you know, like you said, well ahead of time, that, oh boy, this one could trip you up, so be prepared, be ready for this, or stay home and watch the baseball game.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'll put your number first. I promise.
Thank you. So I can worry about it ahead of time.
El Negro Smith.
So we already mentioned in our little intro on this is about overthinking. Just really trying to overdo things. Overthink stuff that doesn't need to be thought about. You know something, man, that gets me from time to time? I was thinking about this on the way over here, thinking about a good example. John, you know when you have to play a horror, and especially if you get up to some of those crazy tempos, and it's still just 1 and 3 on the kick and 2 and 4 on the snare, you're doing a Ashkenazi blast beat. We'll call it that.
And battling how you're sitting because your balance, you can't play that. You keep that kick pattern going.
Yeah, that in itself, man, sometimes makes me overthink things too much.
Yeah.
It's the simplest of beats, but it's fast, and sometimes, man, I will falter from time to time on that, put a little hiccup in there, and it just, man, I get down on myself when that stuff happens. But if I just don't think about it,
it's all good.
It's all good.
Yeah, I get that sometimes, especially tempos.
Yeah.
Like when I'm not thinking anything about even a straight ahead tune that's up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm thinking like the Peter Erskine, count 1 and 3, don't count 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
It flows, it's great. I'll have another night where I'm just like completely flipping out on it and it's not going to work. It's a terrible, man. But we're our own worst enemy with that. In the grand scheme of things, too, that one little hiccup, we're magnifying that into the world ending.
Especially over the period of an entire gig.
Yeah, and everybody, and no one's thinking about that but you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And then the last one I wanted to throw out, and I thought up for a minute before I added this one on my list, but it happens more than we want to think. Or maybe not more than we want to think, but I think it happens more and we get used to it and don't realize it as much. There is an endemic, we'll call it darkness a lot of times. It happens on certain gigs that certain people have. Certain musicians are kind of these dark, brooding kind of folk. Sometimes I'll fall prey to it a little bit, especially again if I'm really tired. Mm-hmm. And I have always thought that these people that we consistently know that might have these issues, that are just dark people when you get on these gigs, that there's some kind of repressed rage or anger that's in that.
Oh, and there's no doubt.
Yeah.
You know, that or maybe it's their way of worrying and self-doubt. And
yeah.
That they, look, I know in my younger years, and I had some hard lessons to learn, if I were nervous or insecure about something, sometimes I'd put up this front like,
mm-hmm.
yeah, whatever, hey, I don't care what you have to say, whatever, about fully feeling the exact opposite. And sometimes I've come to realize that some of those dark, brooding characters are doing just that. And I try to always like not focus on that because it could be something that, you know, it isn't going to change, A, or B, it could legitimately be a reason they're dark.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what their, you know, background is. Maybe they were the muse for that insane, what was that drum movie where that guy got beat?
Whiplash.
You
yeah.
know, maybe they really lived that or something.
They got it handed to them. Yeah.
You know, I don't know. But
yeah.
It's definitely, as I get older, I'm kind of, I can't give a lot of energy to that.
I can't either. I think
because
we've
I
all
can fall prey to it.
Yeah, we've all been on gigs or been part of sessions or been part of some kind of something where somebody's had a bit of a power trip and want to hand it to you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Really let you have it. And again, I think you're right, man. That probably is the case, that somebody handed it to them, and now it's their time,
right?
Their chance to do it.
And oftentimes, we're more hung up on how embarrassing it was as opposed to our abilities.
Yeah.
Or our capability or our, you know, worth of being there in the first place. We're so initially tripping on, oh, everybody in the room just saw me get undressed. You know,
yep.
This is awful. I suck. And well, you know, that's just embarrassment more than it is insecurity at that point. So recognize those too. But one thing I've learned, getting past some of that, is I've just, there's some people I'm just not going to work with. You know, I don't care what the money is. I don't care what, because it negatively affects me, and I don't need any help with feeling, you know,
yeah,
just, you know, frustrated or insecure or you know, my self-worth might suffer any given day, man. It's part of the creative thing. And you can point to, oh, well, this guy's real confident and blah, blah. Look, the majority of people we know that are creative are going to have these issues all the time for a million different reasons. It could be they weren't encouraged when they were younger. It could be the nature of the business, or the circles they run in are cutthroat, or the whole issue of how artists are viewed a lot of times. Just sort of, you're going to get a job, like all that kind of stuff can play into this.
Yeah. Well, now
manic, crazy mindset. But I some people writing off. Here's what bothers me sometimes. I can be a self-effacing type. There's no doubt about it. I know it. But man, it's not like. I hate when there's that flippant. Oh, you and your fake modesty.
Yeah.
That pisses me off, because man, my modesty has nothing to do with my insecurity at the moment. I'm not trying to sell you like, oh man, I'm not really that great. No, I'm like, God, I just don't feel worthy of any praise right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm just kind of vomiting that out, and you're just going to write that off as like I'm practicing false modesty. No, man, I'm really struggling. And most of us do.
Yeah.
We know a few people that have false modesty, and get them in a corner and they'll be like, I am freaking awesome. But for the most part, I hate that false modesty accusation. Because I'm I'm beating myself up pretty regularly. I'm not trying to cover up my ego here.
And I can attest to that truth. I've known you for 20 years.
Yeah, man. Come on.
So
I don't need attention by saying I suck. Could I temper it? Probably. But sometimes I'm just being honest, man.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my heart on my sleeve. Golly, man. My friend Scott Meter just burned that to the ground. 3 songs this morning, and now I got to go in this afternoon and play
right behind him
on the same record with the same players. Sometimes you're just like, I kind of feel like I suck.
Yeah.
Oh well, I'll work through it. I have. It's been 35 years. I'll get past it.
Well, that's what we're here to do today, man. We're going to talk about getting through some stuff.
Come on.
And I mean, let's go ahead and throw one thing out on the table, and that is, this is a self-help style podcast, but it's incredibly important that you help yourself, because A, nobody else is going to do it for you, and B, before you can help anybody else, you got to help yourself, right? Yeah. Before you can be of service to others. So you got to always improve on yourself first. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, I really got into this big time about 6 or 7 years ago, just through a whole host of issues and a whole host of problems, having psychological or mental problems when playing, also even having some physical problems when playing. Mm-hmm. So, let's go ahead and throw out a few ideas, because I know for a fact that these work, and they've absolutely worked for me and lots of others. And the first technique or first tool that I have used and still use to this day is I use free writing and journaling. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to do it. But first, I want to tell you what it's done for me, and I think what most people glean from it is essentially, when you do free writing, you are basically emptying your brain's cache, like on a computer or on a tablet or a phone, when you've got a whole bunch of files that are just cluttering things up and getting in the way and causing mental roadblocks. Mm-hmm. Write some stuff down, and it's amazing at the benefits you can get from that, from kind of dumping that mental cache. Because the philosophy behind it is, we have 2 parts of our brains. We have our subconscious and our conscious minds, right? And the subconscious mind is that old devil that sits back there in the back that is on constant record. It has recorded every single thing that has happened to you in your life. Now, do you remember that stuff in your conscious mind? No. But it's back there. and it pokes away from time to time, and that kind of subconscious mind gets in the way a lot of the time. It interferes with your conscious mind, and therefore you end up having all these different kinds of mental roadblocks. John, I'm sure you've heard the old saying where somebody would say to you, this guy's going after this goal with single-minded determination, right?
Yeah.
Well, essentially all that means that both minds, your subconscious and your conscious mind, are agreeing with one another.
That's a good one.
And that's what you want to do, is you want to try to clear out as much of these old repressed emotions and this old garbage that's sitting back there that's interfering with your conscious mind as much as you can. And the way you basically do it is this.
Don't play Channel 1 Suite when you're 18.
You're saying that added to your cache.
I'm just saying that will help you to not have
to dump it out. Well, here's what you do. Use pen and paper or pencil and paper. There is some kind of a connection. There's some kind of a physical and mental connection about brain to hand, hand to pencil, pencil to paper that works so much better than typing it out on an electronic device.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a physical connection there. When you sit down to start writing, it doesn't have to or need to make sense. You can just literally start writing the first thing that comes to your mind. Let it flow. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct. It doesn't have to make any sense. There has to be no narrative to it. But you'll be surprised once you get into it and once you start writing, what things will kind of jog your memory, what kind of things will come about, what kind of subconscious things just fly out onto that paper. Man, I have filled notebook after notebook after notebook after notebook of these pages of writing, and when I finish that notebook, you know what happens? It goes right in the trash. You don't need it.
That's a great point.
You're just purging. You're not, again, it's not one of these things that needs to be reviewed, so to speak. But I'll tell you what it's done for me. It's done everything from the mental roadblocks to where I mentioned also before I was having some physical issues. I was literally having some physical pain in shoulders, elbows, hands they were just phantom pains that came from nowhere. Back pain, had some back pain as well. Not from any kind of, oh man, I jacked it up by falling down the stairs or anything like that. It was truly mental, psychological / psychosomatic style pain that was caused from just repressed junk and garbage. And let me tell you, I want to, at the end of this show, when we get right before we do our last segment, I want to talk about some recommendations and some books. I want to throw a few things out for the folks as well on that.
Cool.
Have you ever done any of that, John? Have you ever done any kind of like journaling or anything?
No, I haven't. Maybe I should try it.
Man, you will reap the benefits. It is ridiculous, man. And, you know, a side benefit to this, aside from like we talk about, the mental roadblocks and maybe, psychological and physical pain. The other thing that a lot of musicians and creatives do with the writing, just the free writing, the free journaling, many people express like these incredible lifts of like writer's block or creative blocks that all of a sudden once they do that they feel more creatively free. I know Donald Fagen.
Mm-hmm.
Fagen had that incredibly long period of time where he didn't do anything, like between the Night Flying comic here he had like the better part of like 11 or 12 years, something like that.
Quite a while, yeah.
It's my understanding that he did quite a bit of soul searching through this style of self-help that essentially led him to doing more writing. And essentially after that he did Comic-Myriad, he did 2 new Steely Dan albums and then a third solo album, and did some stuff with that Rock and Soul Review, so seemed to help him.
Good deal, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad it did, because we have benefited from his brilliance.
John, another thing that you...
Real quick before I forget, kind of in a real, like you're talking about journaling and all that, I just kind of brought to mind going back to some insecurities and all that. I thought we've talked about this before too, like when we write out charts,
mm-hmm.
how it's not just you're writing out charts, so you have it, like there's sort of this mental note taking, almost that picture perfect memory. You're knowing the song, you're seeing it laid out. It's helping you to feel less insecure about all of that. I think this writing kind of is in the same way. It can be that way in that you're seeing things clearer than just sometimes just thinking about it. We cloud up or focus on one thing and negatives on. Maybe it's going to allow you to feel better about navigating it like you would a song with a chart and writing it out.
Well, if you think about it for a second, if this free writing is essentially, we'll call it your subconscious mind just putting stuff out on paper, it essentially then makes your conscious mind aware of it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that's exactly the same type of comparison for that. Now, John, we've mentioned, or at least I've mentioned on this show, that something I've been doing daily for the past several months, man, as I have gotten into my meditation routine. Once again, man, I think that's a fantastic, fantastic thing to be a part of. And the way that I actually got hip to that, or at least I've been hip to meditation for a long, long time. I've got some friends who are actual monks in monasteries, not the monk drum folks, but some other people who spent some time in monasteries and who have sworn by this for years.
Distant cousins of Thelonious.
You're so funny, man.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, they were espousing the virtues of meditation. And then it's funny how you can sometimes listen to somebody speak and then all of a sudden the real light bulb goes off over your head, or it really gets crystallized at the moment. I was listening to somebody speak one day, and they were talking about all these different really successful people in different areas, not just in the creative world, but in the business world, political world, of course in the creative world. And the theme he was saying is, I'm listing off all these people and this is what they've done, and the only thing they have in common is that they all practice some form of meditation. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, this guy who runs like a Wall Street firm meditates? You would think this guy's not into this, woo-woo, airy-fairy kind of stuff, but all of a sudden he's, taking 20 minutes out of his day to sit down and meditate. Well, again, you can reap these incredible benefits from meditation. And let me clear up a couple of quick misconceptions about this. I think people think that it's this magic pill that you basically do this meditation and all of a sudden you're this enlightened being, and everything's perfect and you see the world totally differently. No, it's not that at all. You notice just varying shades of improvement, little things. There are certain things, like, for example, I'll tell you something I've noticed. I don't get nearly as worked up in traffic. It's simple. That's just a little tiny
just telling
thing.
yourself, I'm not going to get worked up.
Yeah. Not even that as much, John, as it is something that might have bothered me 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think about it anymore.
Sometimes an event, like, I know when that bridge burnt down.
Yeah.
I just was like, there's no reason to get worked up about anything. Expect it to suck. Plan accordingly. Do what you got to do to get where you got to go, because there's nothing you can do about this bridge needing to be replaced in a major metropolitan area. It's going to affect things.
Mm-hmm.
And I never, ever, though inconvenienced a few times, got even remotely worked up about it, because I just said, I'm not, this is going to suck. I already know.
Well,
sometimes you can work through things like that.
That's a sort of mindfulness, man, which is what the type of meditation that I practice is called, like mindfulness meditation. Mm-hmm. It's one of the simplest forms. It's not, I don't use any kind of mantras. There's no religious undertones or overtones to it at all, that's another preconception I think a lot of people have, is like, oh, I've got to turn Buddhist or something. No, not at all. And you don't have to sit there. Another one of my favorite ones is people go, man, I can't clear my mind. I can't clear my mind to meditate. That's not part of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, the misconception is that you're going to sit down and you're going to clear your mind and you're going to just be this blank slate, and all you're going to do is just sit there for like 15, 20 minutes or an hour. No, it's not that at all. The mind is always going to talk to you and tell you these different things. The entire exercise is to, when you notice your mind wandering, you bring it back to, for example, the thing that I concentrate on is just breathing, just the breath. Not how to breathe. In other words, I'm not telling myself to breathe, but just feeling the breath, feeling the coolness of the air, feeling my chest and stomach expand on the inhale and then on the exhale.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you have a thought, the quicker you can rein that thought back in and get back to concentrating on the breath, the rhythm of the breath. That's something that's kind of interesting for drummers as well, to concentrate on the rhythm of that. Every time
we've talked about motion.
Right, exactly.
Kind of yeah, that's a good.
Exactly. Every time you have that strident thought that comes in and you bring it back to the breath, you have essentially done like a mental push-up. You know what I mean? Your mind is, you're rewiring your brain, you're retraining your brain to be present, be right there, be in the moment. You're not necessarily thinking about anything, you're just there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that in some ways also is exactly the way we want to be when we're playing drums. You don't want to have your mind racing and going off in different directions and thinking about this, that, or the other, thinking about, like what my mind, don't rush your bass drum. Whatever you do, don't rush this drum fill going into this. You know, that sort of thing.
What is he thinking?
Exactly. What does this guy think? This guy thinks I'm an absolute turd because I did this. Yeah, just be present and in the moment. And that is one of the ultimate goals. That is on your way. If you want to use the term of being enlightened, you're on your way when you can just be present and not have to worry or think about that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, it's not a huge time commitment as well. Again, I think there's a preconceived notion that people have seen all these monks and different Buddhists and stuff like that that'll sit down and they'll meditate all day long. No, it's not like that. It's not like that at all. There's plenty of people, very successful people, and very successful people inside of meditation that espouse the benefits of it. They do 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day.
I'm going to buy into that, because like the monk thing, I'm not terribly interested in following someone like that. Doesn't eat for like a long period of time. But
is it somewhat?
I can't get into that kind of thing.
You know what's somewhat attractive though? Have you seen those Tibetan monks? The ones that will like walk up the side of Mount Everest and they'll have on nothing but like a robe, and then they will sit down in the snow and then throw like a wet towel over them, and then over a period of like 15 minutes, like they'll heat their body up mentally to where the towel will steam. Is that attractive to you?
Like a pit of rattlesnakes, maybe.
Moving on. The last one I want to talk about is visualization. Another little mental technique.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time that I ever heard about this technique of visualization has to do with me, A, being a hockey fan, and B, the 1980 Olympics. John, did you ever hear about this little story called the Miracle on Ice?
No.
Nah, it's just a bunch of college kids beat a bunch of Soviet pros.
I was going
in
to say
hockey.
It was like some high-end bourbon.
Close enough.
Okay.
Yeah. But essentially, this visualization thing, where I'm going with it, was there was a study done by Soviet scientists just prior to the 1980 Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did was they took 4 groups of athletes. It's not just hockey players. There could have been some hockey players in there, but there were just several different groups of athletes. And so what they decided that they would do is they would run these 4 different groups of athletes through different types of training and then combined methods of training. And so what they were doing was they were combining in some groups visualization or mental training, visualization of like success, right? Mm-hmm. Along with pure old physical training, exercises and playing the games that they played. So what they did was they took group number 1 and said, we're not going to do any visualization or mental training at all. It's just going to be all physical training, traditional physical training, right? And so they took another group and they did a small percentage of visualization and a major amount of physical training. And then they took a third group and they did a larger amount of visualization and mental training and a smaller amount of physical training. And then they took the last group and just did nothing but visualization, mental training. Guess where the most success was?
The last one.
Yes, sir.
You can do it. Is that what?
Was that a good Russian accent?
No, that was kind of like that. Remember that El Nacho Libre? You can do it.
Yes.
I just didn't emphasize it like I should have.
Yeah, so that's what it was. It was essentially the people who did the majority or did all visualization and mental training excelled and won.
So the hockey team was just doing
Physical training, I suppose.
apparently.
Well, at least they were during the actual Olympics. Prior to that, when they were blowing out the U.S. team at Madison Square Garden 12-0, I guess they were doing some visualization. But anyway, visualization, I think, is it's a very powerful and potent tool to help you out. And I think it's actually a sort of meditation, maybe even a little bit of self-hypnosis going on in there with that as well. I've heard that it activates a lot of delta wave brain activity, that's the big dealio when you're getting hypnotized. Like, hypnotists like to have people who can easily and deeply get into a delta wave state in your brain.
Insert tasteless airline comedy here.
So,
I will say, you're talking about this delta wave and all this stuff. Like, I think even though we're not aware of it, I think we kind of naturally do that on some level.
Yeah.
Like, almost on the most primitive level, like, come on, get it together, man. You can play with this click, bury that thing, and get this song over with. That in itself is like kind of like on its most bare bones base level. But if you think about it, I think we are far more capable of utilizing that than we realize, because we do it way more than we think. And if you can kind of corral that on some level, and maybe that's the ultimate way to look at it. Like, oh, I kind of already do that if I really think about it. So I'm just going to try to expound on it.
Well, with that in mind, we've said many times before, the devil's in the details, right?
Very
so
true.
If there are some details that you can add to your visualization to make it as real and to make it as tactile as possible, that certainly helps. Like, for example, a couple things. One, visualize, let's say from a performance standpoint, like on a gig, visualize yourself, of course, succeeding on the gig, right? Another thing is this: visualize yourself also sitting in the audience watching you succeed and be the badass that you are. So, in other words, see it from the audience perspective and also from the first person perspective. Also, I would even go as far as this: try to visualize as much detail as you possibly can. Visualize the lighting, the sounds, the colors, the smells, the feel of things. As much detail as you can add to that to make it as real as possible. It all helps.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
It absolutely helps. So don't force it. Just let it happen. And like anything else, like meditation, it's all in the practice. Just sitting down and doing it.
Yeah. Also, I think sometimes you don't lose sight of the fact that, in your frustration, don't forget you're doing this to help yourself, and, try to look at it positive, even though it might not be magic the first time you sit down and do it.
Oh, no, it takes time.
Yeah. So, don't get, we are in a frightening place in humanity where immediate results are expected on every level, and I think it's becoming more and more of a problem. Immediate results are like not, it's not always going to be the case.
Well, couple things about that, John. When you have anything that's repressed such as that is something that has taken place over a lifetime. So, in other words, you can't undo sometimes 20, 30, 40 years of repressed things or mental roadblocks in a few days. You just can't do it.
No.
It's a practice, and it goes over time. And I think another thing is this. When you have these mental roadblocks and you have these blocked emotions and stuff they're blocked for a reason. It's because they're harmful. They're scary to you. And when you sit down and you have to actually think about that kind of stuff, man, let me tell you, one of the hardest things, or one of the most, I should say, kind of daunting things, is especially when you're doing any kind of free writing and you're just trying to kind of dump the cash and you're thinking about these different things. It is astounding, man. I mean, absolutely astounding when you just when it's just you yourself in this notebook, how your hand sometimes doesn't want to write this stuff out. When it doesn't want to go into those places, it doesn't want to get back there and think to oh man, this is the real root of why I'm having issues with that. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is absolutely astounding, man, that there are times that I have to tell myself, man, it's just you and this paper here. Nobody's ever going to see this except you. Write it out. You've already lived it.
Work it out.
Work it out. You met that old. There's that old saying that Yeats. I'm going to butcher this, man. I am going to just. It takes more courage to examine the deep, dark part of your soul than it does for a soldier to fight on the battlefield.
I believe that.
Yeah, I butchered that, man. We're going to hear about that. That's not exactly right, but I butchered it. But that's what I'm getting at, is that. So anyway,
the same guy who thinks he's amazing all the time is going to call you on that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
One thing that I wanted to touch on before, when you're talking about reaching down and trying to face some issues and experiences that might be difficult to kind of address or let go of, I would say, without question, any mistake I've ever made musically has almost zero effect on me compared to a negative statement someone made.
Absolutely, 100%.
And the reason I bring this up is, A, face some of that stuff and get past it. Look at that person for what they are. Look at what their agenda may have been. Try to reconcile with some of that. Because, I mean, I can think of things that were said to me when I was 18 years old that still negatively affected me in regards to my playing. But my point being, more importantly, well, as important as working through some of that, be mindful of how you are capable of jacking someone up for a lifetime with your words. We need to be more encouraging because, as I said, creatives, insecurity, the self-doubt, do yourself a favor, and while you're working through some of your things, you wouldn't believe how good it can be to lift somebody else up and not be a part of the problem, but be part of that solution. We need to be way more concerned with the positive, uplifting vibe on our gigs than the opposite. It's really easy to be negative. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to trash someone's playing. It's real easy to be buddy-buddy with someone, then go talk with your other buddy behind their back and say, man, this cat ain't nothing. I know what goes on. It happens. We're all guilty of it from time to time. Try to be less guilty of it.
Absolutely. And, another thing that you and I have talked about off air several times from even years ago, an underlying theme of some of this stuff as well, whether it be for yourself or for others, is also the power of forgiveness. Man, let me tell you, of course you have to forgive others when you deem that they've done you wrong, but also that forgiveness is not only for them, it's for yourself as well. Oh my gosh, it's so good to unburden yourself from that sort of stuff. And then, you have to forgive yourself for things that you might have done, for choices that you might have made. Unburden
or said to yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm my own worst enemy for sure when it comes to any psychological shortcomings.
Yeah. John, I wanted to throw out a few book recommendations before we get to our last segment. Now, I'm an avid reader. Love reading stuff. I love helping myself. Like I said before, I feel like I can't help
Black
others.
Page.
That's one good thing, yeah. I can read the crap out of that, man.
Amazing.
That and quarter notes.
Sorry I interrupted you.
But
and my witty nonsense.
I am a huge believer that I am of little service to others if I'm not of service to myself. So in other words, if I can't help myself first, I'm not going to be any good for other people. So I always try. I've been on my self-help, we'll call it hamster wheel, but I am getting places with it for a long time.
Good.
And there's a few books I want to talk about.
One would argue emotion it can be equally as important there. Like,
yes,
if you don't love yourself, who's going to?
So there's a few books that I want to throw out there, and actually I want to throw out one phone app as well when we get to the end of it of this list. The first one is actually geared toward musicians, and it's a book called Effortless Mastery by Kenny Werner, jazz piano player. And something that it's really good for is it's great for focus, breaking through plateaus. We did a little show on that a few months ago. And it, again, is something to help release your creativity, to help with free-flowing ideas. So that's one book. Another one that I like, and it really helped from the standpoint of impressing upon me the importance of free writing and journaling. There's a book called Healing Back Pain, The Mind-Body Connection by John Sarno. He's a doctor up in New York. Now, let me say this before you go, well, wait a minute, this is some kind of psychobabble, blah, blah, blah. You can literally take the term back pain out of the title and pretty much put any other type of physical or mental symptom in there. Like if you're having these phantom problems with your neck or phantom problems with your knee that no doctor can there's not a concrete diagnosis for. Healing knee pain, healing mental pain, whatever. It's basically...
Technique?
Yes, that too.
Woo!
Yeah.
I got to get that book.
And essentially what it does is it talks about the mind-body connection for fixing these psychosomatic issues. And again, let me go ahead and say this really quickly about that book. Psychosomatic pain doesn't mean that the pain's not real. Oh, the pain is real. It absolutely is. But it is pain caused by the brain. It's the same thing if you want to draw a comparison to it. It's widely accepted that if we get nervous, we have what's called like butterflies in our stomach.
Right.
And it's just a mental thing that affects our stomach, the feeling there. Well, if you think that is true, and everybody does, then why can't your brain cause pain somewhere? Why can't your brain cause issues in different parts of your body? It absolutely can. And I'm living proof because I've cured that pain before with that. So anyway, that's I'm going to get off the soapbox on that. There's another book for anybody who is suffering from anxiety or just panic or just an overabundance of worry. There's a fantastic book called At Last a Life by a British fellow named Paul David. It is absolutely one of the best, written from a first-hand experience of somebody who just had crippling, debilitating panic, a guy who didn't get out of his house for years, and he conquered it. And so that's one for you. Another one for the musicians, there's a book called Free Play by Stephen Nachmanovich. It is very similar in some ways to Effortless Mastery. It's one of those books that's like get your brain out of the way and experience free-flowing creativity.
Was it written after Effortless Mastery?
I think before what?
Was it written after Effortless Mastery?
Before. Yeah.
Good. It's not in case of another jazz musician being ripped off.
There's a great book called 10% Happier by Dan Harris. And yes, it is the Dan Harris if you're thinking of who you're thinking of. He is an anchor on ABC News, and I think he does stuff on 2020 from time to time as well. He had a well-publicized national TV panic attack while he was giving the news on Good Morning America. And he started exploring meditation. And essentially what this book is about is he starts kind of knocking down these preconceived notions about meditation and what it actually does, and then talks about his practice and then what he has received, and that essentially through his early practice he's become 10% happier. It's not a miracle cure, in other words. And then the last book I want to talk about is by another doctor. His name is Dr. Howard Schubiner, and it's called Unlearn Your Pain. And it's similar to the Sarno book, but it's maybe like the Sarno book on steroids. There's your medical pun for the day. And again, you can take that Unlearn Your Pain. It can be physical pain. It can be mental pain. It's a book of exercises that has to do, again, with some free writing, some journaling, some other different techniques. So there's that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is an app for your phone, because we like solutions these days, and we like quick solutions. Now, the solution is to help you start a meditating practice. And the app is called Calm. That's the one I like. I've tried a couple of different ones, but Calm is the app that I like. It's free. There are some pay different programs inside of it, but you can get plenty out of the free portion of it. And essentially what it is it is a lightly guided and a good way to start your meditation. So I wanted to run that by everybody. So we hope this little bit of psycho mumbo jumbo helped everybody out today.
Yep. Quit, if at all possible, quit beating yourself up and try to come up with working out of that, and it will do wonders for your playing, your relationships, your just the in the moment, unexpected things that happen on gigs. All of these things, you'll benefit greatly if you take Phil's advice and
stay present. Easier said than done, but it's a practice just like anything else.
Yep.
John, let's finish this sucker off, man. It's been a hot minute since we have done an underrated drummer, so we are overdue.
You go first.
I'll do it. I have a man crush, and it's on a guy whose last name is Appice, and it's not the one everybody's thinking about. It's on the
But it is the spandex.
It is, and he has hair like Vetus Gerolitis, baby. It is beautiful. Anytime you can throw a Vetus Gerolitis reference into a podcast, it's a great show.
Pretty good stuff.
Yeah. I'm talking about the little brother, Vinny Appice. This guy was in my wheelhouse of formative drummers when I was a young buck back in the mid 80s. Vinny Appice, let me go ahead and say this. Vinny Appice is the brother of the one that everybody's thinking of, Carmine Appice, as he likes to say it, but I think everybody knows that it's Appice. So
a piece of what?
Piece of drumming history.
That's true.
Yeah. But Vinny Appice is the younger brother, and I came to appreciate his playing through the band Dio, named after the aforementioned and the late, great Ronnie James Dio. Now, Vinny actually got to know Ronnie through their association with Black Sabbath just prior to that. So Vinny and Ronnie were part of Black Sabbath. This was after the days, of course, of Ozzy Osbourne and after the days of Bill Ward when he left the band. Mm-hmm. The only two original...
Kind of version 2.0.
Version 2.0. This was late 70s, early 80s with those albums like Mob Rules. Was I think the first studio album that Vinny and Ronnie were on. And then I think they did a live album, and kind of quite unceremoniously, Ronnie James Dio mutually parted ways in the middle of a tour, or in the middle of the mixing of that live record, I think is what it is. And he took Vinny with him, and they started the band Dio, and that's really where I picked up on this guy. And Vinny is just, man, he is a great East Coast pocket, got a real heavy groove. Mm-hmm. Just got a real heavy, good feeling groove. He's got a signature sound also that's different from a lot of those guys, man, that we think of in those hard rock metal days of the 80s. He used a big kit, but one bass drum, single bass drum. Mm-hmm. All concert toms, John. All concert toms. I believe he was big in the Ludwig kind of octoplus, but just single bass drum. He had a lot of small to big drums, all concert toms, big mounted drums up off the side. Played the crap out of him, man. This guy, he has really good technique, especially good single strokes, man. Really good, solid, good feeling single strokes. And he is the unabashed master of doing these big single stroke fills around the toms and using little 3 and 4 stroke roughs, those kind of things all the way through the drum fills. Just a great feeling player, plays wonderful musical sounding fills. When you get to know his style, it becomes readily apparent almost instantly when he's got a very distinctive style when he plays. So that's my guy. Check out Vinny Appice. The 2 recordings in particular that really strike me are the Dio album Holy Diver. Listen to that title track, Holy Diver. It's a slow tune, man, with just this heavy groove, man, all the way through, right in the pocket. Check out also the first song on that album called Stand Up and Shout. It's a fast up-tempo tune. Plays great sound and groove on that. Really good, tasteful fills all throughout. And then the second album I want to recommend is called The Last in Line. That's the album that came after Holy Diver. A couple of standout tracks on that are the title track, Last in Line, and then there's a track called We Rock, where he does like a little bit of a military marching snare thing on part of it. So that's my guy, Vinny Appice.
Good stuff. Man, I have, in my less closed-minded later life and in my shocking revelation that Phil Smith was a metalhead, I've revisited a few guys recently, and there are some of these dudes with like fantastic technique and a great understanding of history of drumming and all that ended up in the hard rock circles. Pace is a great example.
Yes.
That guy's hands are second to none.
Yeah. You said, man, Vinny Appice has got a lot of musical depth in his playing.
Yeah.
He sure does.
Yeah, there was definitely, he wasn't someone that was just like locked into one style of music. And
right.
You can tell there's a lot more than that. As is Pace is a great example. Bonham, of course.
Yeah.
But there's some others too that are, sometimes we wrote it off as guys with not a lot of feel. They're wrapped up on their chops, their sound I don't like, and all that.
Just their look.
You know, but then there's always those Alex and Tommy Lee and some of these guys that are like extra, just really great drummers.
Rondinelli, man, Bobby Rondinelli.
Yeah, exactly. So they're out there, and I've kind of been giving a little more attention to them in recent years.
Yeah.
Anyway, my guy is not a hard rock guy, but he is delicious nonetheless.
Who you got?
My guy is Charlie Drayton.
Woo!
Fantastic New York drummer who...
I thought he was a bass player.
Of course you did. No, some people do. You're well aware of his ability on drums.
Yeah.
He's a great musician who happens to play drums part of the time. His real... You know, when he was young, he was kind of a chops guy and ran in some fusion circles and all that in New York, and they were talking about the young pup that was bringing it, but you know, I kind of came more in touch with him through that Keith Richards stuff.
Yes,
where he and Steve would switch off.
Expensive winos.
Yeah, and you kind of hear his playing in that a lot like Steve. Sometimes you're like, who is it? You know, all that.
He played on Love Shack, man.
How about that?
Yeah.
And there's some other stuff too. Like a really great example of his playing is that Across the Universe.
Yes.
Soundtrack. He kills on a bunch of that. Kind of a modern take on Ringo. And they do some different arrangements where he's gotten real creative on that.
I've got him on a Hiram Bullock album.
Oh,
where he sounds really good.
He's a good player, man. Kind of like a combination of all those New York guys you like Steve and Parker and Gadd, and he's got some of that, but he's got a little edge to his playing sometimes too that brings out his own thing.
I think one of the things that we as drummers identify him along with Steve Jordan is that snare drum sound.
Yep.
There are times that he'll use this specific snare drum that I think the one that Jordan uses a lot of times, especially in those early recordings that we think of him with, that is that like a Ludwig downbeat snare drum. I think we think of him a lot with that high pitched Ludwig downbeat drum.
I also think of him as another traditional grip guy.
Yeah.
which is I always think is cool, but I'm too ingrained in my match script to revisit that.
It's a good call, man.
Thanks, man. I like that guy a lot.
Yeah, I do too.
Just-
What's he doing these days?
That's a good question. You know, when I first met him, he was playing with the B-52s.
Yeah.
We did a show together.
Sterling Campbell had that gig when we did
As a matter
something
of fact,
with him.
he might be doing it again.
Charlie Drayton or Sterling Campbell?
Sterling.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A guy I know is teching for the recent dates. I think it's Sterling.
Yeah.
But Charlie, I met him on that, and man, he killed it. And there's another guy with a lot of depth
Yeah.
in his playing, because he did go through his whole chops phase and all that, but kind of found his place. He's kind of like a Josh Freese in a way. Like Josh was like total chops monster kid, and now he's kind of
It's a good point.
considered more of a hard, modern rock session guy. Charlie's kind of the same way in that he sort of got all that out of his system and really found his place in his style.
To a lesser extent, somebody that I'm a massive fan of also that was basically Dave Weckl Jr. that has gotten out of that and has gone to a more abstract creative thing is Zach Danziger.
Oh yeah.
You remember back in the day when he did some stuff with a couple fusion artists, man, he was out Weckling Weckl.
Yeah. I know another kid from St. Louis named Marlon Brown who ended up in New York. He was a Weckl clone down to the kit and was amazing and had a real good pocket. Had it really, really together, but total Weckl head. He went to New York, and I think he ended up with like a round badge 4-piece kit and some old K's and played with Kenny Garrett, and like just New York just spun him on a dime, and he kind of found his place. And he lives over in Germany now, but a real monster like that's super organic, elvinish kind of vibe now, as opposed to.
Well, yeah, what a turn, man.
Yeah.
You can't get hardly any more stylistically different than that.
Well, I think some of it might have been, in his case, and I can't speak for him. He's sort of a friend, so to speak. I know him. We met and hung out, but he, I think sometimes, man, like maybe it was by design. I'm going to go to New York and reinvent myself.
Yeah.
This Weckl thing, Dave's got a pretty good handle on it.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to go a different direction and find my place.
Yeah, if you think about it, there's only so much room for so many Weckls.
Yeah. And you're only going to be compared to him if you're doing that, that derivative of an approach. So.
Well, John, let's get out of here, man.
Baby.
Let's let these people get on with their lives. But before we do, don't forget you can always interact with us. You can email us at drummersweeklygroovecast@gmail.com. That's our traditional email address. You can interact with us on social media. You can tweet us at Twitter. We are twitter.com/DWGroovecast or just at DWGroovecast. And then you can always reach out to us and interact with us on Facebook, facebook.com/drummersweeklygroovecast. And then don't forget, enter to win 2 great prizes from the Monk Drum Company. Go to monkdrums.com. We're going to give away a 10-inch original Monk drum, and then second prize will be a set of Monk drum bongos. All you have to do is point that browser towards iTunes, go into iTunes, go to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast podcast page, leave us a written review. That is right, a written review, and then we will draw names during the week of our 52nd show, our 1-year anniversary, and 2 lucky people will be singing our praises, John.
Nice.
Well, until next week.
Keep that space between your ears in a good place.
That could be a good quote for the back of a t-shirt.
Along with shut your pie hole and be the fluffy cloud.
Man, I'm telling you, you are a quote generator, sir.
Keep that space between your ears in a good place.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost do that. Keep the space between your ears, ... in a good place.
I like it, man. You're like editor.
Do what I can.
I'll give you 10%.
John,
for t-shirt sales.
John, you write the lyrics. I'm the tunesmith, man.
We're like Elton and Bernie.
I'm gonna be Bernie.
Dang it. No, you already called it. You said tunes.
All right. Okay, everybody.
I'm the lyrical genius.
Tune
Back
in
off.
every Monday. Find us on iTunes, Google Play Podcast, Stitcher, Podbean, or all your favorite podcast apps. Subscribe today. New shows every Monday. Until next Monday, this is Phil. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Say bye, John.
See you. Bye.